you very much for joining us in this edition of the India Development Debate. I'm Supriya Shrinate, and straight on to the big news. And this is finally some cheer for the Modi government, which is struggling to get the fisc in order. GST collections have crossed that 1 lakh crore mark in October, clocking around 7% growth over the September numbers. Let me remind you, this is tax collected on trade and services rendered in September, although they are accounted for in the month of October. Also, this is only the second time that GST collections have actually crossed that magical number of 1 lakh crore since the uniform tax was rolled out in July last year. A visibly happy finance minister says things are finally beginning to fall in place thanks to the rationalization of GST slabs and higher levels of compliance. What do these numbers really tell? Is the worst behind the government as far as revenue collections are concerned? And more importantly, is it correct to interpret the higher GST collections as a sign of a bounce back in the economy? The GST bonanza in October is a big topic of discussion and debate right here on the India Development Debate this evening. 3 special guests. We're keeping it short, but of course, we'll bring in a lot more perspective. Prateek Jain, leader, Indirect Tax, PwC, Shagata Bhattacharya, Chief Economist at Axis Bank. And of course, joining us from Indian industry is Harshvardhan Neotia, Chairman Ambuja Neotia Group. So thank you each one of you for being with us. And Mr. Neotia, if I may begin talking to you about the 1 lakh crore mark, it was always considered to be this magical figure. How significant is this mark? And many people will believe, is this just a blip due to festive season or anti-evasion measures that have been put in place? You know, having said all of those reasons and whatever else would have added to this, how significant is the fact that GST collections have crossed the 1 lakh crore mark finally?
Well, it's certainly an important milestone. I think we are seeing the GST getting stabilized. As you know, in the beginning, there were many glitches and many people were unable to sort of log on, etc. I think people are also getting used to it and they're becoming comfortable. And certainly the various measures, including reduction in rates, including anti-evasion measures, etc., have all worked well to improve the numbers. And I think this will steadily be in a positive direction.
Okay, now GST collections has been a bit of a quagmire, and Prateek Jain, I think it's only fair that I put up this question to you because yesterday when the ease of doing business numbers came out and we did rather well at 77, the place where we are still lacking despite the rolling out of the GST is paying taxes. We obviously haven't made improvements there. In fact, we've slipped 2 notches. Everyone hoped that the GST would be a buoyant force and all of that. It had its glitches to begin with. Does a 1 lakh crore today tell you it's stabilizing, things are falling in place finally, as at least policymakers would want us to believe?
Yes, so things are definitely stabilizing. I mean, more than the 1 lakh crore number, if you compare that with the previous year's average collection, which was around 89,000 crores, this 1 lakh number is 12% higher than what you clocked in 17-18. And consistently, even before that, for the last 5-6 months, it has been hovering around 94,000-95,000 crores. So certainly the tax base has expanded. There's no doubt about that. And we started with a much higher rate. If you recall, the 28% rate to 18%. The first reduction happened last year in November. The second set of reduction happened in July this year. So definitely it is stabilizing. There are many factors which has already been spoken about, stabilizing GST, tax evasion coming down, and the measures the government has taken on account of e-way bills, etc. Of course, festive seasons might have helped that a bit, but also bear in mind that for 17-18, for businesses to claim input credit, September 30th or the due date for filing the September 30th return was the last date. So what has happened also is the large businesses have nudged their vendors to comply, and that is a very encouraging factor because the whole basis of GST is that larger companies deal with more compliant ecosystem and they force their vendors to be compliant, and that's what is happening. Now, having said that, while it is good and it is encouraging and is slightly more than what you collected last year, it is still lower than what you have budgeted for. So what the government has budgeted for in this year is around, let's say, 1,10,000 crore or so on a monthly basis, and you still haven't reached that mark. So still you will fall short, but definitely the increasing trend is encouraging.
No, of course. Thank you very much for that answer. An increasing trend is encouraging. But you know, Shagato, before I go any further, I think these numbers are also to be looked at in the larger macroeconomic perspective, and we can't lose sight of that. Of course, there are those who will jump on and say that, wow, this is good news, and you know, fiscal deficit is all going to be met because the GST has crossed from a 90 to a 1 lakh crore mark. Is that being too euphoric? And do you believe this is finally a trend that we're going to see, which is going to help us bridge the deficit going forward? Yes, it is much lower than the asking range and asking level, and we might still end up short of about 1 lakh crore as far as GST collections are concerned by the end of this year. But at least as far as, you know, this contributing to the deficit is concerned, we're finally in the right direction.
Yes. So the second part of your question first. In terms of the collection, I think from 1st October, the government had started the TCS measure, the collection of source and deduction at source, both for e-commerce vendors as well as for all government contractees. So I think that probably would have helped. Of course, I mean, the numbers are the payables for September. So given the festive season, I think that would also have given a boost to the numbers. So given if this trend actually continues, I mean, if the e-way bill, other compliance measures keeps the levels at 1 lakh or whatever, I think the government will be able to plug some part of the deficit, which we thought would be about 60,000 crores. But having said that, I think what we are seeing in terms of the growth momentum going forward, that is a little bit of a concern. Because the Q2 numbers also we have seen that margins are lower, profitability seems to be a little lower. In other words, tax collections coming in from the corporate sector might actually take a hit. That, of course, the trends we'll have to watch, wait and see. But let's see how that goes. But we are still probably not completely out of the woods.
No, I agree with you, and I think while we can, you know, while we can hear indirect tax collection, it suddenly looks like the direct tax collection may not be all that good as far as at least corporate taxes are concerned. But let's stay on with the good news. I think we are in a run-up to the Diwali. It's only fair that we talk about the good news. And Mr. Neotia, it's obviously a function of a pickup in consumption demand during the festival season. My question is really taking it forward. What is going to now make it sustainable as we move on?
Well, I think we need to continuously look at the glitches and keep resolving them. I think a lot of work has happened, but some work still needs to carry on. I think also moderation in taxes would continue to be an industry expectation. There are some areas where assurances have been given to reconsider. So I think as they happen, more compliance and more robust collection is what I see ahead.
Fair point, fair point. But while we are at it, if I may take a quick follow-up question with you, sir. I know this is also significant because this has come after the rationalization of taxes. But, you know, the rationalization is never enough. And so I think it's only fair that I ask you, what is the scope of reducing taxes further? And when you said assurances, which areas of assurances are you talking about? Which sectors specifically?
So I believe that in the real estate sector, which is where I'm involved, I think there has been a demand to look at it, to review the way it is administered, because there is a double taxation of sorts with stamp duty and GST. So, and also the GST has a certain amount which you deduct for land, which does not take into account the cost of land. It's basically a flat. It's a flat 1/3. So I think these issues are important to be addressed.
Okay. Pratik, while we are at it, and obviously this boost has come, you know, this consumption boost specifically is important because it has come after a slew of rate reductions. Going forward, and especially given the fact that GST is going to be a big revenue earner, both for the state and the centre, and I'll come to the state revenues in just a bit, what sort of scope there is in rate rationalization? Look, corporate India is always going to want a lower rate. As a consumer, I would want a lower rate. But we also have to take the real economic realities into cognizance. There's an election around the corner. I don't know how easy it is going to be to get the other states on board to do this. As far as rate rationalization is concerned, do you believe there is scope, and will that really be a big booster as far as collections are concerned?
So I definitely think that there is a scope for rate rationalization. Two things here. One is that you still have a lot of items in a 28% category, which was never meant to be, right? So 28% was only supposed to be limited for a few products like tobacco and luxury cars and stuff like that. But today you find products like air conditioners and cameras and cement and many other items still under 28%. And 28% is much higher than any other developed economy would tax, or even developing economy would tax on indirect tax. So definitely there is a case for reduction of 28% to 18%, and I'm quite confident that will happen over the next few months. The other is that you still have multiple slabs, right? So you have 5%, 12, 18, and so on, and there is a case for 12, merging the 12 and 18 into a single category of 15 to 16%. That will simplify the tax system a great deal. Although I think that may not happen before the next election, because that perhaps requires a larger consensus amongst the states and the center and working together and multiple discussions on that. And of course, we would want to see things like ATF and natural gas coming, under GST as well. I think petrol, diesel, etc. will take time, but these are the products like ATF and natural gas they can bring under the GST. That will also be rationalization. So some of these things can definitely happen, but I'm quite hopeful that 28% to 18% on many products which are there is a real possibility over the next 3 to 4 months.
Pratik, if I may take a quick follow-up with you, and this really has to do with compliance. 32% of GST returns are filed by firms which are below the exemption limit, and another 36% by firms with turnover below 10 million rupees. They account for just about 3.8% of the total turnover, and I'm given to understand 5.3% of the total tax liability. These smaller firms, I'm presuming, will not really add on to the bigger collections, even if business activity and everything else has to pick up in the second half, like policymakers would insist. Am I right there?
Yeah, you're right. I agree with you. I mean, I think and this is something which is a big concern for the government, the total number of businesses which are filing returns. I mean, you have more than 1 crore registered players, and even if you exclude some 15 odd lakh which are competition who need to file return once every 3 months, you still are left with around 85 lakhs, and what you are getting people who are filing is around 66, 67 lakhs. So still there are maybe between 15 to 20 lakh registered businesses who are not filing the returns, and something which the government is really worried about and trying to sort of figure out why they're not filing. I agree. I mean, the focus of the government is on the bigger players, and also mind you that the kind of data that they have now and they have collected over last year and a half, it's a very rich data, and the government is going to do a very sophisticated data analytics on the data that it has, and you will see the results coming in next few months, where there will be more intelligent notices, more intelligent investigation which will start. And I think people are realizing that evading tax under the GST system is much more difficult than it was earlier, when you had different tax systems in different states. So all of that will help, but I agree. I mean, the smaller players will not really contribute a great deal to this growth.
Okay, hold that thought, because I want to also just, break this down into states versus center. And Shaugato, the state revenue shortfall has been a bit of a concern there, because states faced an average shortfall of about 16% in GST collections in the last fiscal. So far, it has come down to 13% between April to the August period. There are states that have done extraordinary growth, which includes Kerala, Jharkhand, Rajasthan, Uttarakhand, Maharashtra, your obvious ones. And then there are states, then there are states that have lagged. It is going to be a concern for that gap to close if GST was to be sustainable, right?
Yes, it is. I mean, obviously, I mean, if you have a certain amount of budgets for your GST and you're not meeting those budgets, I mean, obviously, I mean, because the assured 14% growth in state indirect tax collections is likely to force more revenue transfers from the centers, thereby depleting the centers' own resources. But having said this, for this year at least, for the time being at least, states have been able to match some part of their indirect tax collections via the higher sales tax that they have got through the higher taxes on the ad valorem taxes on petrol and diesel and other fuels as well. So to that extent, I mean, for the short term, for the near term, I don't think they are in deep distress because of their shortfall in collection. Of course, this varies from state to state. Some states will have more, some states will have less, etc. But going forward, I mean, just like the center, the states too will have to put in a lot of effort on compliance using data analytics or whatever to increase their collections up to their budget levels.
Let me take this to Mr. Neotia. And Mr. Neotia, you know, while it's festival demand and anti-evasion measures that are being credited for this uptake, and anti-evasion measures are important. I think Prateek has a point there that it's very baffling why 15 to 20 lakh businesses are not paying or not filing returns. But as far as anti-evasion measures are concerned, and because you represent Indian industry, it's only fair to ask you that in their zeal to collect higher taxes, does sometimes India Inc. remain at the receiving end, and do you run the risk of being, I don't know if harassment is too strong a word, but do you run the risk of being toyed by the tax man?
Well, I think it's all coming down. My general sense is it would be case to case, and I'm sure there would be people who would have poor experience, and those who would feel very relieved that a lot of things are happening now electronically and you don't need to really meet people, etc. So it's very difficult to give one kind of answer to this. It's really going to be very specific to each case, but I generally feel that the direction is positive, and hopefully the interference, at least for the bulk of the people, would be very, very low of the tax authorities. And on the top, of course, there would be interface, but hopefully things will be more streamlined as the laws get more clarified.
Shagata, fair point. Shagata, if I may come quickly to you, on this whole MSME thing, and of course the constraint is there, the financial crunch or the lending constraint there, or the credit crunch impacting GST collections is what a section of experts seem to be suggesting here. This number could have been even better had that not happened. Is that an area one perhaps needs to look into?
Yes, so a bit contradictory. One, of course, the current problems with credit, particularly from NBFCs, who are a large provider, a large source of credit to MSMEs. That's become a problem. So MSME activity is likely to actually take a hit on their growth levels. But we just heard, as you mentioned, that a large segment of this segment of industry and services, the MSME segment, actually are contributing very little by way of taxes or GST taxes. So I'm not sure if there's a direct correlation between the GST collections from the MSME segment, but on the whole, your question on more coordinated policies to sustain the level of growth in the MSME segment, I think is a very, very relevant and a critical question at this point in time.
Now, I think I'm told Mr. Neotia wants to come in on that, and I think Mr. Neotia, you want to add to the credit crunch for the MSMEs, and is that because I kind of agree with Shagata, this is a contra call of sorts. They're not contributing to the GST pie, so should credit be fueled there? As far as GST tax collections are concerned, of course, from their businesses and the survival point of view, maybe, and there is obviously a tug of war that's on. But I just told you want to add on to this.
Absolutely. I think the MSME sector, but coupled with the challenges we have in the banking sector and now in the NBFC sector, have all put a tremendous liquidity squeeze in the market. And this is certainly impacting both production and therefore supplies. And I'm sure that once we can address these challenges, there will be much better growth in the economy.
Okay. Prateek, it's been over a year and one keeps hearing whether GST has been a failure, a success, when is oil going to come in. I wanted to ask Mr. Neotia this, but how hopeful are you of new additions in the GST? We're now going to look at pure play politics. These are important, an attempt has been made, but are you hopeful that GST is going to include some of these new things?
I'm quite hopeful. I mean, I'll tell you where the hope is coming from. I mean, if you look at the experience of last 1.5 years, yes, we did not start with the perfect GST. Yes, we had a lot of problems. Yes, we would have thought about the whole system better than what we did. But around 29-30 GST Council meetings have happened, and this GST Council comprises of all the state finance ministers belonging of different parties. And of course, you can argue that most of them are from the ruling party as of now. Having said that, not even a single decision has gone for voting till now. So obviously they have found a way to work out a consensus, and I just do hope that that continues. Of course, you'll have to see when the new government comes, there will be new equation which will come into play, and one hopes that GST Council will continue to perform the way they have been performing. There have been differences, but those differences have been sorted out with discussions and amicably, and hence that gives us hope that perhaps at least for this the politics would be kept on the backside, and economics of this will come on the fore. So I'm quite hopeful that will happen. I also think that once we are nearing the election time, the decision making would be slow, and so let's see how it works.
You hold that thought, because I'm not so sure if corporate India agrees with you. And Mr. Neotia, a quick last word on the show. Oil under the GST, ATF was tried, didn't quite happen. Every time prices go up, everybody, whether it's the ruling or the opposition benches that say put oil under the GST, do you see that happening? Are you hopeful that when elections around the corner? Prateek, seems it's the proof of the pudding should make people do it. I'm not so sure.
Well, some issues are contentious because all the states have to come on board, and they had been kept out of the net because everyone had not agreed. We would certainly hope that there would be convergence on some of these issues even while the election season is on. But that would be, I'm sure, a little optimistic hope. Maybe some of these issues will have to wait for a new government to come in.
Okay. On that note, I can't go any further, completely out of time here, but thank you very, very much for joining us, Mr. Harshvardhan Neotia, Shaugata Bhattacharya, and of course Prateek Jain, for taking time out and joining us. It's good news, 1 lakh crore mark has been crossed by the GST. Let's keep our fingers crossed for this trend to continue and be sustainable. Also remember, the largely commendable and hailed consensus amidst the GST Council is very good, has held the GST in good stead. With elections around the corner, is that going to begin to run out? Considering the recent inconclusive GM meetings on sugar cess or digital incentivization or national calamity cess, I don't know how things will progress from here on. But GST is an important tax for India, and it's finally good to see it stabilizing. We do hope this trend will be sustainable and will continue. Thanks very much for being with us. Don't go anywhere, because we'll take a really short breather here and we'll come back with the other big story, another big debate of the day. Companies Act Ordinance, what are the changes and how does it impact Indian industry? We come back in a minute and tell you all about that.